everyone. Welcome to this evening's 5 by 15 event. It is great to be with you all and to be joined by 5 incredible speakers coming up this evening, filmmakers, artists, writers, poets, economists, as we explore hidden narratives, the law, the truth about communicating numbers, some incredible personal stories, and hear from some of the people that we really most admire anywhere in the world. And we've been looking forward to and planning this lineup for months, and we're really, really excited to be able to jump straight in and get started. And thank you to everyone. I can see there's hundreds of you all coming into the Zoom now, but thank you to everyone for zooming in and joining us from wherever you are. So without much further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker this evening, Laura Bates. She is the founder of the Everyday Sexism Project. She's a feminist writer and an activist, and her new and explosive book that has just hit the bookshelves is Men Who Hate Women. In it, Laura lifts the lid on the communities of men who hate women, and she went underground, undercover, both online and offline, to explore the ideologies and the impact that these communities have all over the world. And the Everyday Sexism Project, if you don't know about it already, is a collection of thousands and thousands of women's experiences of everyday sexism. And it's an incredible piece of research and history that has really given us an unparalleled and really disturbing picture of what is going on around the world for women. And I know it's not an easy subject for anyone to put themselves on the line and explore. And we are really lucky to have Laura tirelessly unearthing these stories. And we're really honored to have her back at 5 by 15 today. So over to you, Laura. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much, everybody who's joining us. I want to tell you about my new book, but the story begins 8.5 years ago when I started the Everyday Sexism Project. That project was started for a very simple reason, because it seemed that people, in particular women and girls, were experiencing an overwhelming amount of sexism, gender discrimination, sexual violence, workplace discrimination, sexual abuse on a regular basis. But at the time when I tried to talk about sexism, I came up against a brick wall. People told me men and women are equal now. There isn't any such thing as sexism anymore. And I felt that I couldn't solve a problem if people didn't know it existed. So the premise of the project was very simple. It was a website where anybody, anywhere, people of any gender could share their own experience. And together we could look at those en masse and recognize hopefully the scale of the problem. I didn't think I could fix the problem overnight, but I thought that if people didn't even know it existed, it would be very difficult to fix it. And having started that project, which was so very simple, which simply provided a platform for anybody to share their own experience, the backlash was very swift and very acute. I soon learned that there was a broad online community of men who hate women, and I learned it because they got in touch. Because if you are a feminist writer, a feminist activist, really even if you're a woman with an opinion online, you quickly become aware of these communities or of some members of them. I started to realize that there were pretty vast and sprawling communities of these men that when they would band together and arrange to send me messages on the same day, so that, for example, on a bad day, I might get 200 messages, and this has gone on for 8.5 years. Detailing which 7 weapons they might use to disembowel me with before they raped me, detailing how they would lie in wait for me and where they would be and how they would videotape murdering me and put it on the internet, or whatever it was that day. But there was a school of thought at the time that it was best not to give these groups the oxygen of publicity, that we knew that they existed, but talking about them and bringing them into the spotlight would be to be giving them a platform. And I really was quite sympathetic with that view. So I largely kept quiet about this stuff and I carried on with the work I was doing, and it seemed to me that the most pragmatic way to tackle gender inequality was to focus on schools, to talk to young people, to open up opportunities for them to have conversations about gender stereotypes and the way that they affected all of them, about their career aspirations and the role models that they saw in the media, about the way that those women were portrayed and affected, about the way the media presented men and women, about sexual consent, healthy relationships, you name it. So for 8 years, I went into perhaps on average 2 schools a week all over the country to have these conversations. And of course it was uncomfortable and tricky, and there was some resistance and things were difficult at first, but generally speaking, we managed to have a fantastic conversation most of the time. until a couple of years ago when I noticed that something strange was happening. I'd arrive at schools and find enormous and angry resistance from boys who weren't prepared to have a conversation, who weren't open to listening, who already had very extreme and very ingrained beliefs about feminazis, hating men, about white men being the true oppressed class of our times, about a wave of false rape allegations and the fact that the majority of allegations were false, about men in their droves losing their jobs to angry women making up completely false stories, and employers who were prepared to sack men with no kind of basis in truth or any kind of investigation. And they were so confident about this that I started to feel it was a form of radicalization, particularly when I noticed that these boys were coming out with the exact same words and phrases at schools from rural Scotland to inner city London. They were even using the same false statistics to back up their arguments. And I suddenly put two and two together one day when I started to ask them, how do you know? Where have you heard this? And they started to give me names that I connected back to these extremist communities of men who hate women that I was aware of online. At that point, I realized that these communities had morphed and spread to such an extent that they were no longer tiny internet cul-de-sacs that we could starve of the oxygen of publicity. They were actually doing very well with propaganda by themselves, but they were infiltrating and affecting teenage boys to such a degree that if we didn't talk about it and we weren't able to tackle it, then we were doing a real disservice to those boys and by extension to their female peers. So I went undercover to investigate what's loosely known as the manosphere. It's a connection of different online communities. And for a period of 18 months, I posed as a very ordinary white middle-class man in his early 20s named Alex, who was disillusioned with the world and the idea that everybody seemed to think he had this thing called privilege. And I watched as Alex was gradually drawn in to a web of websites, forums, platforms, groups, communities, vloggers, and I started to recognize that this was massive. The groups I investigated included incels, or involuntary celibates, who believe that women are deliberately denying them sex and deserve to be raped or murdered as a result. It might sound extreme until you think, for example, about Elliot Rodger, who went offline specifically in the name of this incel ideology, murdered 6 people and seriously injured 14 in Santa Barbara. Or Alec Manassian, the driver of the van in the Toronto van attack, who again explicitly in the name of this misogynistic, hate-filled ideology killed 10 people and injured 16 in Toronto. Or Ben Moynihan, the teenager in the UK who attempted to murder 3 women over a 3-month period in the name of the same ideology. Or, for example, the teenager who walked into a Toronto massage parlor earlier this year and killed a woman with a machete. They're not isolated incidents. I've traced this specific extremist online community of ideologies to the murder or serious injury of over 100 people in the last 10 years alone. But the vast majority of people haven't heard of these ideologies, and those who have dismiss them as tiny internet backwaters. There are pickup artists, a related community who obviously sprawl offline as well. $100 million industry globally. Not that you'd know it from the media portrayal of the sort of hapless, lovable rogues like Barney Stinson in How I Met Your Mother, but actually men who in many cases have themselves advocated rape, have boasted about committing rape, have videoed themselves assaulting women they don't know in public spaces and put the video online for their fans and acolytes to copy. These are the so-called gurus for several $1,000s in any major city anywhere around the world on any given weekend, are training men to sexually harass and in many cases sexually assault women with their techniques like going caveman, what they call overcoming last-minute resistance, and teaching boys who might stumble on these communities online anxiously looking for tips about girls. Every girl has a rape fantasy, you're just playing into it. One young boy I saw anxiously asking for advice about talking to a member of the opposite sex immediately was given the advice, rape it. Then there are men going their own way, another connected community and part of the manosphere, but men who believe women to be so toxic and so incredibly dangerous and damaging that the only way to handle them is to cut them out of your life altogether, to have no contact with them sexually, romantically, or if possible in the public sphere or in the workplace. Again, it sounds extreme, but we're talking about communities tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands strong. We're talking about men whose videos about these ideologies have been viewed tens of millions of times online. And their ideas are spreading incredibly effectively through the mainstream media, through politicians, through sanitized figureheads who talk about this in academic or tabloid circles, to the extent that we end up having the idea that Me Too is a witch hunt cropping up on some of our biggest national television and radio programs. And if it sounds extreme and niche, consider the fact that 27% of American men, when recently surveyed, said that they now avoid one-to-one meetings with women in the workplace. Or that Mike Pence, the Vice President of the United States, refuses to have dinner alone with any woman other than his wife. Then there are men's rights activists, perhaps the most acceptable face of the manosphere and the ones we're most likely to see in the news being given mainstream coverage because they pay lip service to very real issues affecting men, issues like the male mental health crisis, issues like veteran support, issues like male workplace injuries, but who actually devote their time and their energy to attacking and undermining women and feminism, to bringing lawsuits to try and defund women's sexual violence services. And one of these spurious lawsuits brought by a self-proclaimed men's rights activist lawyer in the States, which was against the male-only military draft, which is a real touch point for men's rights activists, when he didn't like the way that the judge handled it. Earlier this year, he turned up at her house and shot her son dead, and also shot her husband. So these are online ideologies, yes, but they're not niche, they're not tiny, they're not small groups of men who never come offline or meet. We're talking about men who, in the names of these ideologies, have come offline and committed real violence against women. We're talking about men who are deliberately grooming boys. What I found was that they don't just try to suck boys into their groups or forums directly, they're extremely clever. They use bodybuilding websites, which sounds odd until you realize that there is 10 times as much content on the average bodybuilding website I researched about the teen section than any other section. So it's a group that is ripe for the picking. You're looking for boys who are already anxious, concerned about particular ways of projecting a certain alpha male masculine image to the world. Bodybuilding websites are a very clever place to find them. They are grooming boys using gaming live streams when boys are in their bedrooms, in their own homes, but on their headsets and speaking over the internet to people they don't know. And they're very clever about using online social media like YouTube, for example. Now, it might not sound like such a big deal until you learn that YouTube accounts for 37% of all mobile internet traffic, that it's by far the biggest social media platform used by young people, and that 70% of the videos viewed on YouTube are recommended by its algorithm. You know, the videos that pop up and tell you, try watching this next. So if you put those two stats together, you learn that a quarter of all mobile internet traffic anywhere in the world just consists of people watching the videos that YouTube has chosen for them. And at that point, it becomes significant that YouTube acts as a kind of radicalization machine, that its algorithm pushes you towards watching more and more extreme content because that's what keeps you watching the longer. And that alt-right, white supremacist and extreme misogynistic influencer networks have taken advantage of this as a means of radicalization. They talk about grooming boys, they talk about using jokes and memes and content online that's related to popular culture as akin to adding cherry flavor to children's medicine. And there is undoubtedly a huge overlap here between these extreme misogynistic communities I investigated and the alt-right and white supremacy. You cannot disentangle the two because they are so closely interlinked. The alt-right and white supremacists are seeing these extremist misogynistic communities as a means to pull young men in, as a kind of slip road to their own ideologies, but their ideology is also predicated on extreme misogyny, their obsession with birth rates, with replacement theory, with the idea of what they perceive as hordes of immigrant men coming in to plunder the dehumanized commodity of fragile, vulnerable white women. All of this is mixed up together, and we're missing a trick if we don't try to recognize that. Or, of course, to recognize how closely these things are bound up with wider terrorist acts, that so many terrorists have a background of domestic abuse, of domestic violence, of stalking women. Women are essentially canaries in the coal mine singing unheard until bigger atrocities occur. If we were to take domestic violence more seriously, if we were to recognize that these forms of abuse are as serious as other kinds of abuse, we'd be well on the way to tackling this stuff. But people haven't heard of it. When I talked to counter-terrorism organizations about the book as part of my research, I kept having to repeat the word incel and spell it out. When I talked to people about the book, when I was researching it, I told them I was working on a book about incels, about these communities. And one of them said, I didn't know that you were interested in microbiology. Another one of them said, oh, is that a kind of battery? At the moment, people simply don't know that these communities exist. There is so much that we can do to tackle this problem. We could recognize it as terrorism when acts that meet every definition of terrorism are being carried out in the names of these ideologies. We could recognize what they're doing to young boys as grooming and radicalization, and support schools and teachers to recognize it as they do with other forms of radicalization, and support and protect young people. We could provide offline spaces for young men to have mental health support, to deal with the fact that there is no remaining youth centre funding across the country, that 600 youth centres have closed. If we provided offline spaces for boys to tackle these real issues that are raised around male mental health and other problems, we'd be stopping the manosphere from being such an incredibly seductive alternative. And if we tackled gender stereotypes and domestic violence more broadly, we'd be cutting off some of this problem at its source. For me, this has come full circle, really. It's another problem I can see where I don't necessarily think that I can solve it overnight, but I also don't think that we can solve it if nobody knows it even exists. My hope is that this book is a first step towards getting people talking.
Thank you, Laura. That was an absolute tour de force. That was amazing, incredible start. And we're so, so grateful for all the work that you do, and honoured really to have you here at 5 by 15. Men Who Hate Women is out now, and I hope that everyone will go and get a copy of that book and find out more about these stories and really the horrible influence that these communities are having all over the world without us even realizing. Thank you, Laura. Thank you very much. So next up we have Waad Al-Kateab. She's joining us from Greece, where she's reporting for Channel 4 News on the refugee crisis in Lesbos. So we are so thankful to you for making the time and making this work for us. We've been hoping to have Waad with us for many months. She's one of our absolute heroes. She's a filmmaker, she's a mother, she's an activist, and she's director of the incredible film For Sama, which was nominated for an Oscar and has won numerous awards. It documented her life over 5 years in war-torn Aleppo as she fell in love, as she gave birth to her first daughter, Sama. And it tells the story of the war and what happened in that city. The report she made for Channel 4 News on the conflict in Syria were some of the most watched pieces on the programme, receiving almost 500 million views online, which is absolutely amazing. And she won 24 awards, including the 2016 International Emmy for breaking news coverage. So what an honour to have you with us, Waad. I also want to mention Action for Sama, which is your charity and campaign to raise awareness. And I will hand over to you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Daisy, and thank you so much, Laura, for the amazing and important subject, which really touched us all, and the great way of dealing with this too. Today, I want to talk to you about, not about me directly now, but I want to tell you about another amazing woman who's today in Idlib. Idlib is the last area out of the regime control where people can live not really freely, but at least out of what the regime can do for them directly. This area has been like bombed and shelled by numerous and different weapons, but still until today there is an amazing people who living there. One of them is Hiba. Hiba Barakat is a Syrian filmmaker. She lives in Idlib and she is reporting from there. Hiba lost her brother a couple of years ago. Her brother was arrested by the Syrian regime, and after a while, her family learned that he was killed because of torture. Few months after that, her father was killed by an aircraft attack by the Syrian regime also. And at that time, Hiba was married and she was living in Turkey, and she couldn't be with her family in that situation. Few months later after that, Hiba and her husband decided to go their separate ways, and she was writing for some local newspaper, But then she felt that she wanted to be back to Syria. She wanted to be with her family, and that's how Hiba like went back to Syria. She was, as I just mentioned, writing for a couple of newspaper, and then she felt that, like in our community in Syria, even before the revolution, like usually people don't read, and with the war, with the difficult situation, people start to be like more busy with their situation and what's happening, and they wanted to see more videos. They wanted to see like stories by their eyes more than just reading. And for this, Hiba felt that maybe she should take another path in her journey, and she should start like to film. And she felt from the first story she did that there is really an amazing way of telling the story, of even facing everyday challenge that she has as a woman and as a filmmaker. One of the stories that she shared with me and I saw before, and also she's very proud of it. That was the first story she did with local social media, and the story went out and got like very attention from the locals. It was about a woman who was around 65 years old when he did the story with her. This woman, like her husband died when she was 24. She had children, and she like stayed with them her whole life. She wasn't able to get any education through the years, and in our community, some of the women like they get married very early, and she was one of them. So she didn't know how to write or how to read, and when she became like 63, she decided that she wanna like uh, learn how to write and how to read. And for Hiba, this was one of the inspiration that she got from the situation in Syria, although all the attacks and all the hard situation, but people still look for hope and look for a future for them. And why I'm telling you about Hiba, that was something I mean, very personal. When I'm looking at Hiba now, I'm looking at myself 3 years ago. 3 years ago, when I was in Aleppo, interrupt in a besieged city, I didn't know at that time if I will be alive or not. The only thing I know that I have one camera. I can film so much stuff. I can try to tell the world what's happening in my city. Although there was so much difficulties, but I had so much belief. That belief, I got it from the early days of the Syrian Revolution in 2011, when I was like just a student at Aleppo University doing economic and marketing. And that was in 2011. I was 21 years old. I tried to do all my best in the way of being part of my community and part of my country, and tried to stood against the regime and chant with alongside with so many people in Syria for better future, for democracy, for justice, and for respect for us as a citizen in Syria. Uh, it was very hard, but at the same time, we had so much hope that we will not just be able to change the face of Syria and Syria, but also we will be able to change the whole world. The regime was facing the peaceful demonstration in Syria by arresting activists, by torturing them, and that was the only tool that they had to kind of like terrifying us. A few years later, the regime was supported by the Russian air forces. They start to use bomb and shell to kill the people who are living in an area out of the regime control. And that's where I was. That's where I met my husband, Hamza, who like we fell in love, and we were both believing in the importance of our rules as a Syrian people. I was filming, he was a doctor, so we lived together in a hospital. We tried to do everything we were able to do for our people, for our future. And I started to film day by day, just the things that was happening with me. For a while, I believed that the importance of my camera is to film other people, to tell the stories of the people who I'm living with. But then in one point, I felt that this life could be ended at any second, and in one way or another, I should turn this camera and film myself, film the things that I'm going through, the experience that I'm facing in this situation as a woman, and then as a new mom, and then as a filmmaker. I filmed so much material, and for 5 years, I was kind of like believed that the word and what I'm doing is something I know that it's very important, but at the same thing, it's not changing anything. In 2016, when Aleppo was besieged and we were inside, I was reporting for Channel 4 News, and it was something very important for me because for the first time I started to see how many people are watching this material. I'm not just like reporting for local like audience or people who they know the story, but also I'm reporting for people they may never heard about Syria. And Inside Aleppo was the series that I've done with Channel 4 News. It got so many attention from politicians, people who are decision makers, and at the same time, I felt when I was inside Aleppo that all of these things is not changing anything. And I kind of like believed this when the only option for us was to leave our country. And for me and my husband Hamza and my first daughter Sama, it was something like we didn't want to believe. We wanted to stay in our country. We faced everything we faced, and we wanted just like to try to do something. And then the only option we have in the end of 2016 is to leave Syria, to leave Aleppo, the first place where we felt like we have a country, we have a small example of what a country means. And then we left with all the people who were in Aleppo. We were displaced out by the Russian and the Assad regime. And for a minute, I knew the importance of my work when I was inside, but I kind of like felt that there's no way of going or like pass over what we went through. And I start to believe that like maybe I should just like break my camera and not do anything anymore in media. And maybe that took, like I stayed in this situation for maybe 5 minutes, and after this I felt that I lost everything. I lost like my country, I lost my hope, I lost even my future, but I should not lose like the only thing that I have, which is our story. I stood and I did my first documentary, which called For Sama, and it was my experience through 5 years of love and war and death and suffering, but also like and hope and believe that the only thing we have as a people is our stories. For Sama, as Daisy maybe just mentioned, like when won numerous awards all over the world. But what won for me was the Syrian people who believe that this is our story. What it won too was the importance of the story, of telling this story for people all over the world, people who may never like been to Syria or they don't know what's happening in Syria, or sometimes even they believe that refugees all over the world is something not good, or we should not even like host these refugees. And after they've seen this film, they start to understand this experience. It was something like very overwhelming for me when people looked at the film and seen the film and come to me with their tears saying like, what can we do? And we want to do something for Syria. And for this reason, we created Action for Sama, the impact campaign that we did for the film, for people to be part of our battle and our fight for a free country. And after all of this, today I'm in Greece. I'm trying to report what's happening right now in Moria, in one of the camps who got fired. There's over 13,000 people from refugees from Syria, from Afghanistan, from so many other countries who are now living in the street under like a very high temperature, and they don't know where to go because their camp got fired. They are displaced now again in Europe, in the country where they respect human being. And to be very, very honest, I'm very emotional today, and I feel like not that hope that I had before I came here, but at the same time, I mean, we need to keep that hope. We need to keep fighting. We need to be all together in this. We need to show solidarity for the people who are different and who are in very hard situation. And I just want you all, like, maybe to go and watch my film to understand what I was really talking about, and to believe in other people, to show the best of you and helping other people. Maybe is my story is just one story who you may like hear about now, but I'm sure that around you there is so much stories. Please look at everyone you know around. Look at the refugees in your country. Try to hear from them. Try to hear why they became refugees and how it's for all of us. We need to look for a better future. If we were all together, if we have our story like owned by our voices and by our um, like memories and by our like for our future, this is all what we need like to do. And thank you so much for this amazing opportunity. I'm very glad, and it's my really pleasure to talk to all of you. And please like watch for Sama, and like hope to see you all soon in different areas.
Thank you, Waad. Thank you so, so much for being part of this and for your extraordinary story and for sharing it with us. And good luck in Greece. And we're thinking about you out there. And everyone should watch for Sama because it is the most incredible film. So thank you very, very much. And thank you to the team at Action for Sama who have been helping us so much in the last few months.
Thank you.
Bye, Waad. Thank you. So, after that extraordinary story, we are moving to our third speaker. Tim Harford has been with us before. He's absolutely amazing. And I think the topic of his talk is incredibly timely and relevant. I think statistics have probably never been as important as they are right now, when millions of lives and billions of people's livelihoods depend on data, on predictions, and on having accurate statistics. And this is for sure the age of misinformation, when statistics can be so confusing and actually quite misleading. Tim's new book is called How to Make the World Add Up, and he's going to tell us a bit more about that. It takes a deep dive into the world of bad research and misplaced motivations, and it also asks how we can better understand data and overcome bias and make more sense of the world around us. He is the undercover economist. He's well known to all of us as the host of Radio 4's More or Less, and he's a senior columnist at the Financial Times, and we are delighted to have him back. Welcome, Tim.
Well, thank you so much, Daisy, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Let me just read you a paragraph that caught my attention when I was a young man. You can make an estimate of how many children have been born into a Dutch or Danish family by counting the stork's nests on the roof of the house. In statistical terminology, it would be said that a positive correlation has been found to exist between these two things. So those words were written by a journalist called Darrell Huff. Darrell Huff wrote the most successful book ever written about statistics. It's called How to Lie with Statistics, and it was published in 1954. And it's brief and it's witty, and it's a great book. He made Darrell Huff a nerd hero. People like Ben Goldacre, for example, have praised him, or Charles Whelan, the author of Naked Statistics, which he describes as an homage to Darrell Huff's book. And yeah, so too did I devour this book when I was a young man. When I was a teenager, I have to say, I didn't spend a lot of time checking out information about bodybuilding. I was there for the statistics, and Darrell Huff's book was giving me the statistics that I needed. Of course, it also raised the fascinating question of where babies come from. And as Darrell Huff pointed out, maybe storks, because in houses where there are a lot of babies, there are also a lot of storks. Of course, you may be wondering at how that trick is done, and Darrell Huff, of course, explains. Big houses attract big and potentially big families, and big houses have more chimney pots on which storks may nest. Of course, you can prove anything with statistics. In fact, there is a peer-reviewed scientific paper titled Storks Deliver Babies, P equals 0.008, not joking. And all the zeros after the decimal point is proof that that's not just a chance relationship. There's something really solid there. And in the example that Darrell Huff gives, there's something that's really solid is you've got a big house, there's a lot of room for babies and a lot of room for storks. But much as I love Darrell Huff's book, I've become increasingly concerned about what it represents. The sheer fact that the most popular book ever written about statistics is from cover to cover a warning about misinformation tells us something about this defensive crouch that we've kind of got into whenever we're faced with a statistical claim. I mean, Darrell Huff's very clear about this. He says, the crooks already know these tricks. Honest folk must learn them in self-defense. Self-defense. This is a vision of numbers as political weapons or tools of advertising agencies. And of course, they can be that. And Darrell Huff made it all very funny. He made it all seem like a game. It was like stage magic. And I'll show you how the magician achieves the effect of pulling the rabbit out of the hat. And that's all good fun. But of course, you must never, ever think that it's real. You must never, ever be fooled. So that's fine, I suppose. But what really started to make me uneasy was the realization that in the very same year that How to Lie with Statistics was published, 1954, that's also a landmark in the history of epidemiology. That's the year that two British statisticians, Richard Doll and Austin Bradford Hill, produced some of the first compelling evidence that smoking cigarettes dramatically increases your risk of cancer. I was actually in Richard Doll's house just last week. It's part of an Oxford college. And I was told the story as he presented the research, and everybody in the room was smoking, and they all stubbed out their cigarettes. And then they said, go and check. You want to be sure. Because it's not a game. It's not about propaganda. It's about trying to understand how the world really works. It's about trying to uncover important truths about the world. I noticed that people are celebrating the invention of radar today because it's the anniversary of the Battle of Britain. And I think of statistics as a kind of radar. You can identify all kinds of things coming in at you, threats coming in at you, such as the fact that cigarettes will give you cancer, or the coronavirus. Or you can just try and understand the world, the economic booms and busts, or environmental problems, or demographics. There are nearly 8 billion people on the planet. You can't hope to understand any of this without statistics. So the way that Doll and Bradford Hill were telling the story, it's not a game at all. This is life or death stuff. And their research, which was extremely careful, was no trick. It saved tens of millions of lives. So 1954, this remarkable year, these two different visions of statistics, the one that really mattered and the one that got all the attention, they came to public view at the same point. And that might be just a historical curiosity if it wasn't for the fact that 1954 was also the year that the tobacco industry first started to roll out their response to research such as that published by Richard Doll and Austin Bradford Hill. They had a bit of a problem. Their product was killing people. You think about the kind of things people worry about today, like gluten and stuff like that. I mean, cigarettes are seriously, seriously dangerous products. How on earth, in the face of this growing scientific evidence, how on earth do you persuade people to keep on smoking? How do you keep the regulators at bay? How do you keep the lawyers at bay? How do you fend them all off? Well, the tobacco industry's strategy was, with hindsight, brilliant. They realized they didn't need to prove that cigarettes were safe because people who smoke want to believe that already. They don't want to think that they're killing themselves. All the tobacco industry had to do was to muddy the waters, was to give people some reason to believe that maybe they weren't dangerous. Give them a cognitive foothold to cling to. Give them some reason to doubt. And that's where I start to get really uncomfortable about Darrell Huff and How to Lie with Statistics. Because once you start viewing the whole world of statistical and numerical claims, the whole world of scientific evidence, the whole world of expertise, once you start viewing that as basically a bit like storks delivering babies, It's full of spurious correlations, full of fake news. Once you think about the world that way, you've kind of given up, haven't you? You said, well, I'm not going to believe anything. And if I don't believe anything, well, at least I won't be fooled. There's a story about Galileo, the great scientific pioneer, being persecuted by the Catholic Church and saying to the cardinals, just look through the telescope. I've got the telescope right here. Just take a look. You'll see the moons of Jupiter. And the cardinals refused to look. They thought it was some kind of trick, some sort of dark magic in the telescope. Now, we laugh at that sort of idea now, and the medieval superstition of it. I mean, in truth, the story has probably been rather exaggerated over the years. But I don't think we should be laughing. I think the joke's on us. Because I see statistics as a kind of telescope as well. You know, a bacteriologist would use a microscope. Somebody trying to fend off the Luftwaffe would use radar. Somebody trying to look at the stars would use a telescope. And economists and epidemiologists and demographers and neuroscientists and all kinds of people. Well, our telescope is statistics. And I'm surrounded by people today who refuse to look through the telescope of statistics for exactly the same reason that the cardinals allegedly refused to look, because they were frightened of being tricked. In 1965, the US Senate held a hearing asking the question of the life or death question of whether health warnings should be put on packets of cigarettes. And experts were called in to testify all the epidemiological evidence, all the reasons to believe that smoking could harm your baby if you were pregnant, could give you heart disease, could give you lung cancer. All of these experts came in. But one of the experts who was interviewed said, you know what? You can find a really strong correlation between the population of storks on the roofs of houses in Denmark and the Netherlands, and the population of babies in those houses. There's a correlation between storks and babies, he said to the senators. And of course, I wasn't saying that storks delivered babies, but just that these spurious correlations do come up all the time. And the senator chairing the hearing said, do you seriously mean to tell me that there's as casual a connection between cigarettes and lung cancer as there is between storks and babies? And the expert witness said, yeah, the two seem to me to be about the same. His name was Darrell Huff, the nerd hero who wrote How to Lie with Statistics, whose brand of skepticism turned cynicism, where everything was a trick, was absolutely perfect, match made in heaven for the tobacco industry, who promptly hired him to write a sequel called How to Lie with Smoking Statistics, which mercifully was never published. But I think that story should be a warning to all of us who like to show off our statistical savvy by shooting things down, by debunking things, by showing what out there is a lie, but who never seem to have any time to think about what's true. I really love the fact that people enjoy more or less. I feel very uncomfortable when people come up to me and say, oh, I love the way that you shoot down all those fake statistics. Well, we do that, sure, we can shoot them down day in, day out. But if that's all we do, we failed. Because it's important to understand what's false, but it's a lot more important to understand what's true. And what I'm trying to do in How to Make the World Add Up is give people a set of tools, cognitive tools, not just technical tools, but tools for mastering your own filters and biases, your own wishful thinking and your own preconceptions. And these are tools that I would hope anybody can use to empower themselves, to think for themselves, to see what's true about the world more clearly, rather than just dropping into that defensive crouch that says it's all fake, you can't believe a thing. I hope I've succeeded. And if I have, I hope more people are going to be picking up this statistical telescope and gazing around, unafraid of what they might see. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Tim. That was so brilliant. What an incredible story and so beautifully told. And I hope that everybody will go out and get a copy of How to Make the World Add Up, which is out in 2 days' time. And really, really thrilled to have you back with us and to have so many people zooming in. Thank you very, very much. So now we have something a bit different for 5 by 15, our first ever anonymous speaker. Our next speaker is a junior barrister specializing in criminal law and the anonymous author of the award-winning #1 bestseller, The Secret Barrister. And their new book has just raced to the very top of the bestsellers. It's called Fake Law, The Truth About Justice in an Age of Lies. And it builds a defense against the abuse of law, our rights and our democracy, and is entertaining as well as being very urgently important. As an anonymous author, we obviously had to find a way for them to appear at 5 by 15 without revealing too much. It's been slightly more complicated, but thanks to the amazing team at Picador Books, we've recorded this talk specially for 5 by 15, and it has been voiced by Jack Hawkins, who has narrated the audiobook, and it is heard here exclusively and first. So over to The Secret Barrister.
What's the first thing that you conjure to mind when you think about the law? Better still, complete this sentence in your mind. The law is what? An ass? Boring? Broken? That one was mine. A quick plug for my first book there, Stories of the Law and How It's Broken. A gravy train for lawyers? Whatever your instinctive response, I'd imagine that unless you work in the law or have a particularly favourable personal experience of the justice system, you won't be finishing that sentence with a compliment. The justice system is something that most of us, from my experience, don't feel a strong affinity towards. We don't feel we own it. We don't feel we have any real stake in it. It is something external and alien, something best avoided until we are dragged into it. More than this, many of us, according to survey after survey, don't simply look at the law with apathy, but with outright disdain. It doesn't work, it doesn't deliver what we understand to be justice. And the multiple ways in which it doesn't deliver justice are writ large all over our newspapers and boomed across the Houses of Parliament by our politicians. We hear about the compensation culture, no-win, no-fee lawyers driving an industry where people are handed absurd lottery win payouts for the most trivial, self-inflicted ailments. To use one headline example, one council employee was awarded £500,000 after he fell off the toilet. Another was awarded a 6-figure payout when he crashed their motorhome after putting it on cruise control and going into the back to make coffee. We hear about the abuse of our legal aid system, the most expensive in the world, which has become a racket by which fat cat lawyers help criminals and illegal immigrants escape justice at the expense of the British taxpayer. There's the employment tribunal system, weighted against the employer, showering unearned riches on whinging employees complaining about discrimination in the workplace. We read about the tragic cases of infants like Charlie Gard and Alfie Evans, desperately poorly children who are denied life-saving medical treatment by, in the words of Nigel Farage, a legal establishment closing ranks and directing that the children should die. Our activist judges, enemies of the people, are a large part of the problem, supplanting the will of the people with their own liberal, pro-EU agendas. The problem is that those examples, and indeed almost all of what we are told about the law and the justice system by the tabloid media and by our politicians, simply aren't true. They are instances of what a marketing mogul with an eye for neologisms might call fake law. They are distortions, misrepresentations, and in some cases outright lies, giving us a completely false understanding of the decisions our courts make, what our laws say, and the first principles of our justice system. And the effect of this is to dishonestly and manipulatively divorce us from something which we in fact own. And this matters on a fundamental level. The law underpins our democracy. When we vote, we are voting for a legislator, for a person to represent us and to vote and act on our behalf when laws are made. If we don't understand the law, or worse, if our understanding is maliciously corrupted, it creates a huge democratic deficit. It means we don't know what we are voting for, and we don't know whether or not we've got it. Worse still, it means we're vulnerable to exploitation, to those in power taking advantage of the gaps in our understanding to service their own agendas, which often run counter to our interests. Because what is crucial about those examples I gave before is not simply that they are untrue, but that those stories, those very narratives, were used as a cover by those in power to remove our rights. The lies about the so-called compensation culture have led to legal reforms making it harder, sometimes impossible, for injured people to seek redress. Lies about employment tribunals resulted in the government bringing in a scheme of upfront fees for claims. Destitute, recently sacked people were required to find hundreds or thousands of pounds just to lodge a claim for wages worth a few hundred. Claims fell off a cliff. The scheme was later found to be unlawful by the Supreme Court, but not before the lives of thousands of vulnerable people had been turned upside down. Legal aid has been stripped to the bone, cutting millions of vulnerable people adrift from accessing justice in the face of rogue landlords, bad employers, and inept, cruel government departments. The disease is international. The lies about the case of Charlie Gard and Alfie Evans were used by politicians in the US as weapons in the Trump administration's attempt to overhaul Obamacare. They were seized by Fox News and the Republican Party and misrepresented as the UK's socialised healthcare system putting poorly children to death for reasons of finance. And back home, only last month, the fraudulent attacks on our independent judges and judicial review have led to this very government setting up a commission to examine how they can stop judges intervening when the government acts unlawfully. Our rights are under attack like never before. That is why I have written this book. I want to expose the myths and the lies that we have been fed for so long concerning our justice system. I want to try to reconnect us to something that we own and that we need to take back. I want to show how the law underpins and envelops our daily lives in ways we don't even think about, and help people understand what is going on behind these popular, recurring headlines. A large part of the problem, historically, has been people like me. Legal professionals jealously guarding the complexities of the law and the secrets of the justice system as ours alone. Nothing that the public need concern themselves with, just trust us that we've got this all under control. That mindset needs to change. The law does not belong to the lawyers, it belongs to all of us. We deserve to know how the law really works and where the problems really lie, because make no mistake, there is a lot wrong with how we do justice. It's just that it's not what usually makes the headlines. I worry that we are increasingly vulnerable. We live in times where the government makes no secret of its disdain for the independent judiciary, for the lawyers applying the law, for any mechanism that seeks to hold it to account. And like many governments before it, it is trying to convince us that the changes it wants to make are in our interests, are, for want of a better phrase, the will of the people. If we don't know when we're being misled, we can find ourselves cheerleading the erosion of the very rights and protections that we have spent so long fighting for.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And I hope that everyone will get a copy of Fake Law, The Truth About Justice in an Age of Lies, which is out now. And details for Newham Bookshop, who we partner with, are in the chat as well, if you want to have a look and order from them. I think they do have some signed copies too. So after such an incredible, extraordinary lineup, we have one more incredible treat in store. Our final speaker tonight is a BAFTA-nominated, award-winning writer, international poet, performer, playwright, artist, and broadcaster, Lemn Sissay, and author of the unforgettable memoir, My Name is Why, which has been a huge, huge bestseller and is out now in paperback. Lemn has been very busy in the last few days launching an amazing exhibition yesterday, the digital exhibition called Hold Still, which he launched along with the Duchess of Cambridge. And then today, he was part of the judging panel for the Man Booker Prize, and the shortlist was announced. So he has been super busy, and we are really grateful to have him with us. We've been hoping to have Lemn come and join us again at 5 by 15 for many, many months, and we have finally persuaded him. So this is a huge honor. And over to you. Welcome.
Hi, thank you very much. Thanks to 5 by 15, and welcome to my little corner of my front room, where I shall now tell you a story. I'm really pleased that Newham Bookshop are the official bookshop of this this gig, because Newham Bookshop have been around a long time, supporting poets and supporting action in the community, and this bookshop tracks my entire career. And it is the independent bookshops, isn't it? And the independent publishing houses and the people who are putting themselves on the line to share stories that otherwise would not be heard. They are the fuel of the entire industry, really. You know, the big presses depend on the independents to bring new writers and new voices, and so do the agents. They're incredibly important to us. And yeah. I've been told all my life that action speaks louder than words. But that is to assume that words are not an action, which they are. That's what this entire event is about. It's about people putting words into the gap that was there before, so that they could articulate what one person has seen and experienced. Words are an action. And if you don't believe me that words are an action, walk into any room. Today is a good example. That's where there's a meeting and there's a sort of group of people sitting, and say, do you know what? It's a bit hot. It's a bit hot in this room, and watch what happens. Obviously, that's not going to happen at the moment because there won't be more than 6 people, but you get me. Other people in the room will say, do you know what? It is hot. Can we open a window? Do you mind? Another person will say, I've been absolutely dying to say something. It's way too hot in here. It is always too hot in here, etc., etc. Words are an action. And as soon as you give words to an event, to a truth that you feel that only you have seen, that is the first step of being seen. And they say a picture speaks 1,000 words, but 1,000 words speaks 1 billion pictures. And that's why we write, and that's why we take pictures. And that's why I'm a judge of the Booker Prize, and that's why I was also a judge of Hold Still, which is an exhibition of the National Portrait Gallery about us and how we have been through this pandemic, through as if there was a fish-eyed lens in our hearts, taking a photograph of what we see and feel, the grandparents that we could not hug, the child that couldn't kiss its parents. I think now might be a good time to show you that series of pictures that's on the National Portrait Gallery website. That final photograph was of a woman who travelled across the country to see her grandfather and to show him a photograph. And that photograph is of the child, the 12-week-old embryo, which is in her womb. She brought that picture to show him. The exhibition is on the National Portrait Gallery website, and it went live 2 days ago. Today, we announced the Booker Prize, the Booker Prize shortlist, which is six brilliant writers, and there are more writers of colour on that shortlist than there's ever been in the history of the Booker Prize. We didn't choose them because they were writers of colour. We chose them because their work was, in our opinion, as a group of 5 individuals, was the best. I'm going to share with you why touch is important, why in the National Portrait Gallery's exhibition, all of those photographs are about people trying to touch each other and knowing that they can't. The only way they can is through a window, and we understand how important touch is when it's taken away from us, most of all, not when it's happening. I'm going to read for you now how touch became important to me from my book, My Name is Why. At 14, I tattooed the initials of what I thought was my name into my hand. The tattoo is still there, but it wasn't my name. It's a reminder that I've been somewhere I should never have been. I was not who I thought I was. The authority knew it, but I didn't. The authority had been writing reports about me from the day I was born. My first footsteps were followed by the click, clack, clack of a typewriter. The boy is walking. My first words were recorded. Click, clack, clack. The boy has learned to talk. Fingers were poised above a typewriter, waiting for whatever happened next. The boy is adapting. Paper zipped from typewriters and into files, and the files slid into folders under the S section of a tall metal filing cabinet. For 18 years, this process repeated over and over again. Click, clack, clack, secret meetings were held. The folders were taken out, placed on tables, surrounded by men and women from the authority. Decisions were made. Put him here, put him there. Shall we try drugs? Try this, try that. After 18 years of experimentation, the authority threw me out. It locked the doors securely behind me and hid the files in a data company called the Iron Mountain. So I wrote to the authority and I hand-delivered the letter. The reply informed me that I had to write to customer services. So I wrote to customer services, and customer services replied to say they were not permitted to release the files. The authority placed me with incapable foster parents. It imprisoned me. It moved me from institution to institution. And yet now, at 18 years old, I have no history, no witnesses, no family. In 2015, following a 30-year campaign to get my records, the chief executive of Wigan Council, Donna Hall, wrote to me. She had them. Within a few months, I received 4 thick folders of documents marked A, B, C, D. Click, clack, clack. On reading them, I knew. I took the authority to court. How does a government steal a child and then imprison him? How does it keep it a secret? This story is how. So that's from the jokey preface of my book, My Name Is Why, which came out exactly a year ago. It did take me 30 years to get my files. At 18 years of age, when I left the children's homes, I had two missions. One was to write poetry and perform it, and the other was to find my family and prove what had happened to me for the first 18 years of my life, that my foster parents had said that my mother was not around, that she didn't want me, and prove that that was a lie, prove that the social services had stolen me from my mother. From 18 years of age, that was my mission. To give words, to say the unsayable. I was stolen as a child, robbed from my family. Once I finally got the evidence, I took the government to court. Once I took the government to court, I then used those files to show the case against the government, my foster parents, and the people who did what they did to me, so that I can stand before you now and tell you it's the truth. The most important thing that I have learned in having proved my case, in having nearly self-destructed. After all, if these people were doing these things to me, if they were imprisoning me, then maybe there was something intrinsically wrong about me. If the foster parents did say that they were my family forever, and yet they put me into care at 12 years of age and said they would never speak to me again, and never did. If the children's homes got rid of me at 18 years of age, leaving me with no relativity to any memory that I had had for that past 18 years, not one person called me after that. Not one person wondered how I was when I was 19, 20, 21. None. I realized at 18 when I left care that I didn't know anybody who knew me for longer than a year. All my friends were going off to college, were going to work, etc., 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 were telling me that they didn't want to be with their families because families are horrible. Of course they were at 18. They wanted to go out and experience the world. I wanted to prove what had happened to me for the past 18 years. The point is this: the greatest thing that I've learned about what seemed like the greatest harm that could happen to a child is to forgive, is to fully 100% forgive the people who hurt me most. Because only then could I begin to trust that I wasn't, that there was nothing wrong with me, that I wasn't the kind of child who deserved what they did to me. I know I've proved it legally. I know I've proved it artistically, but I don't believe that I proved it to myself. And in forgiving them, that was the first step of realizing that I'm okay. And that is my alarm. Thank you.
Lemn, thank you so, so much for being part of our event, for your extraordinary story, and for making it such a beautiful ending, thinking about so many themes, about telling your story and about the truth and trying to uncover the truth after so many years, and how important that has been. We are hugely grateful to you, and I hope that all of our 500 people streaming in will make sure to get a copy of your book, My Name is Why, if they haven't already. And thank you also for showing those incredible images of Hold Still, the exhibition, which you can find out more about from the National Portrait Gallery. And it is an extraordinary collection and a kind of moment of history that I think is unique and really does illustrate how much we've lost in the last few months of connection, but how important it is to try to find a way to continue to connect. And thank you for just reaching out to us through Zoom tonight, because it has been a really, really special and fantastic evening and very, very memorable. So Newnham Books as well, you gave them a huge shout out. We love Newnham Books. You can get the books there from all of our speakers. And I want to say thank you to all of them for being with us tonight. Laura Bates and Waad Al-Kateab, Tim Harford, the secret barrister, and of course, Lemn Sissay. And tweet us, let us know what you think. I know there have been quite a lot of tweets at 5x15 Stories is our handle. And you can join us again next week. We have Christina Figueres, and we do have some great things coming up in October. And we are going to open the chat, and Em might chat a bit with people if you want to.
Definitely.
And you can let us know your thoughts, and we'll leave you for a few more minutes, and then we will log off. But thank you everyone for being part of this tonight, and good night.